What's up everyone, Subterranean here, and today we're going to learn how to make this bass. This is a very talkish, almost monstrous dubstep growl, made famous by artists like Skrillex and numerous others. I actually came up with the idea for this tutorial when I was working on my most recent song. I created this growl and I thought it sounded great and I wanted to share it with everyone. So, we're going to start off by initializing Serum's patch by going to Menu and clicking on the Initialize Preset. And like always, we're going to get rid of the external effects for now because we won't be using those until much later. Now that we've got a fresh instance of Serum with no external effects, we're going to start with our first oscillator, which is actually a custom wavetable that I made myself called Gutter Growls. In the description box below, we'll have a link where you can download the wavetable, along with instructions if you don't know how to install Serum wavetables, and we'll also include the full Ableton project file, and a couple effect presets which are used in this sound. So now that we have our first oscillator, let's play with the wavetable position and see if we find a good sound. I think we'll put it at about 110. That works well. Now we're going to go to our warp menu. We're going to select bend plus and minus. We're going to put it at 6. And now let's take our LFO 1 and drag it onto the bend plus and minus. And let's tweak the modulation and see what we get. Somewhere around 41. And let's do the same thing to the wavetable position. Drag it on. And now we'll change the modulation. Not too much. I think 27 will be good. Now we'll fire up our second oscillator, and this wavetable is going to be a monstrous 6, which is under the spectral category in Serum. And now let's move around the wavetable position on oscillator B and see if we get a sound we like. I think we'll put this at about 124. That should be pretty good. Now we'll put a bend plus and minus on this oscillator. We'll put this at about 47. And then we'll put the LFO 1 onto this bend plus and minus. About 19. And then we'll put the LFO 1 on this wavetable position. I like it on 38. Let's turn down the level on oscillator B, seeing how this is more of a filler sound, and we want the first oscillator to be the main part of this bass. We're going to click on level, and we'll drag it down. Maybe about 39%. I think that'll be good. Before we turn on our filter, or we do anything else to this sound, there are a couple of small things that need to be fixed. First off, the LFO pattern we're using is the default one, and it sounds pretty bland. I'm going to get an LFO pattern that I made beforehand, and it's going to be in my user folder. In the download link, we'll have this preset bundled with the other presets and the Ableton project file with the wavetable. We'll set the rate at 1.2, and we'll set the mode to trigger. Much better. Now we'll turn on our filter. We'll send A and B through the filter, and we'll turn this filter into a high notch, or HN12, which is under the multi-category. And now we'll put our LFO 1 on the cutoff. That's a little too severe for my taste. Let's dial down the modulation. Somewhere around 70. And now let's take the cutoff and drag it down. Somewhere around 141 Hertz. Now we'll take the resonance, we'll increase that to 49. Take the frequency and increase it all the way up to 84. And now once again, we'll take our LFO 1 and we'll drag it onto the knob. This time we're going to have it going backwards. And again, let's tweak with the modulation and see if we get a better sound. Minus 74 sounds good. And the last thing we're going to do before we move on to the effect is we're going to go down to our little pitch bend corner, and we're going to change the bend range up to 12 semitones, and we'll change the bend range down to -12 semitones. So we'll be going a full octave up and down. Heavy pitch modulation like this is essential for dubstep. Some people might prefer to use LFO patterns when they're modulating the pitch on their growls, but I prefer using the MIDI pitch bend because it offers a lot more control over how it sounds. Now we're going to go to our effects, and the first effect we'll add in Serum is going to be a filter. We'll drag that all the way up above hyperdimension, so we have that as the first effect in this chain. And we'll change this filter to be a format 1, which is under the miscellaneous category. Now we'll grab onto the cutoff knob, and let's see if we get a good sound by tweaking it. About 363 hertz maybe? Yeah, I think we'll leave it on there. Now we'll turn up the resonance to 33, so we get a more resonant and growly sound. We'll leave the drive on 0, and we'll leave the format on 0, but let's put our LFO 1 on the format. And once again, we'll tweak the modulation. About 33. And the format filter offers a really nice vocally effect, but it's taking out a lot of frequencies in our sound and making it sound really low quality. So let's turn the mix knob down a considerable amount. I think 40% works good. Now for our next effect, we're going to turn on a hyperdimension. On the hyper side of things, we're going to turn the mix down to about 16, and we'll leave the rest of the controls on hyper the same. And for dimension, we're going to turn the mix up to 17, and now we'll tweak with the size knob and see what sound we get. Maybe something a little more subtle. We get about 6. Yeah, we'll go with that. Now we'll fire up the distortion, and we're going to use my favorite type of distortion, which is the Diode 2. I use this on a ton of my basses because I love the way it sounds. And this is what the bass sounds like with the distortion. A little bit too crispy, so we'll go to the drive and we'll turn it down. Maybe about 20. That's just the right balance of heavy without being too overly distorted. Now we'll grab a flanger. We'll put the rate down so we can modulate the flanger by the LFO and we'll have more control over it. We'll put the depth at about 30. And as always, we'll take our LFO 1, drag it on, and now we'll play with the modulation. About 38 maybe. That's pretty good. We'll put the feedback on 64. We'll leave the phase the same. Now we'll turn on a phaser. Again, we'll set the rate all the way down like we did with the flanger, so we'll have more control over the sound. We'll also turn the depth down. And now let's see if we can find a sweet spot with the frequency. Somewhere close to 360, maybe 357. Now we'll take our LFO 1, drag it on, and then we'll tweak the modulation. Modulate it by about 10. And we'll put the mix at about 48. And for our last effect inside Serum, we're going to put on a compressor. We're going to switch it on to a multiband compressor. And now let's turn up the gain and see what kind of sound we get. I think we'll put it at about 6.2. I really like that. And now we'll move the threshold a little bit over to the left. About minus 15.2 decibels should be good. Now before we add on our external effects, let's turn down the master so it doesn't clip. This is really important when you're adding a lot of external effects to your basses, because they might become really distorted and nasty, not in a good way, when your master is clipping. Turn that down. Somewhere around 51 will work well. And now we're done with Serum. Now we're going to add on our external effects. The first one we're going to add is a vocoder. We'll switch the carrier from noise to modulator. Set the number of bands all the way to 40. Increase the range to 18 kilohertz by 20 hertz. And we're going to leave the depth and attack the same. Now let's play with the release and see what kind of sound we get. About 35.6 milliseconds should work. And as for the format, what we're going to do is we're going to modulate it using these little curves to create a really good pattern. This is going to make the bass a lot less bland and give it some real character and movement. So let's delete this pre-existing pattern. We'll create a new one. And for this MIDI clip, we're just going to take one long note and hold it down for the entire duration of the pattern, seeing how we're also going to be modulating the pitch. Just put it at E0. We'll mute the drums, and this is what the growl sounds like without modulation. Pretty bland. First we'll do the pitch modulation. We'll click on this little button, and now we're going to draw in a bunch of curves. This is just an example to show you what you can do. I'm not doing this very intricately, but that's because this isn't supposed to be for a full track. And this is what it sounds like with a lot of pitch bending. Now we're going to go and get the format, and we'll do the same thing. Take these little curves. Again, just sort of doing it as random to give you an example. And this is what we have. It gets a little bit weird and high-passy at certain parts, but you can hear it's overall a lot better than how it was with no modulation. Speaking of modulation, the next effect we're going to add is a phaser, and we'll be doing the same thing with this effect. First, we'll change the amount of poles all the way up to 8. We'll set the color to 0, and we'll set the feedback on 80. Now we'll click on the frequency, and again, I'll just do some random modulations to give you an example of what you can do. A lot of peaks and valleys, go up and then down. And now here's the growl with phaser frequency modulation. We have the dry wet set all the way up, which is why the phaser is really prevalent. It actually kind of sounds like a snail's bass this way, which is pretty cool, but that's not the sound we're going for. So let's take the dry wet knob, and we'll start to decrease it. We'll put it around maybe 34.9. And now here's what it sounds like with a dry wet of 34.9. You can still hear it well enough, but it's not overtaking the sound. Now our next effect is going to be a third-party plugin, which is not stock included in Ableton, but this effect is absolutely free, and it's available for Windows and Mac. And the effect we're going to use next is Camel Crusher, which you may already have, seeing how this is a very popular free VST. What I did for my growl is I went into the presets, got the tube warmth preset, and I modified it a little. I turned off the filter because it didn't really do anything with the sound. I left the compressor off and kept the master on. And for the distortion, I turned the tube down a little bit and I turned the mech up a little bit. And now here's the sound we have with the Camel Crusher. You can hear that added a lot of grit to the sound. Now we'll go back to the Ableton stock effects, and we're going to add on a multi-band dynamics. And we'll actually be using a custom preset that I made for it, which is a modification of the OTT preset. And as you can see, I did a lot of modifications to this preset to get it to be the way it is, which is why I included this as a preset with the Ableton project file. I changed the input of the high and mid to 5.20 decibels, and the low was changed to 10.6. The high output is now 10.3 decibels, the mid output is 5.70, and the low output is 16.3. The overall output is 8.80 decibels, and I did a lot of tweaking to the attack and release sliders. Now that the multi-band dynamics is out of the way, we're going to add a reverb, and like always, I'll turn the low cut on, leave the high cut on, and we'll make kind of a narrow curve, more emphasis on the highs than the lows. Turn chorus and diffusion network off because they don't really do anything for the sound. We'll actually leave the decay time on the default of 1.20 seconds because I like how it sounds for this growl. And now let's start tweaking with the dry wet and see what kind of sound we get. Maybe about 19%. I think that sounds good. Now there's a lot of very muddy and resonant frequencies going on with this sound, so we're going to add an EQ8 to aid that. A lot of the EQ curves I did here are kind of weird and almost out of order, but I thought they sounded good for this sound, so we'll just go with those. Let's go to our first band. I'll change it to a regular low cut, not a 4 times. And let's cut off a lot of the low end. Maybe about 153 hertz. I'll just type that in to make it easier. And now let's play with the quantize and see if we get a good sound. About 1.01, maybe 1.02. Now we're going to take our second band. We'll leave most of these on the default. And we'll set this at 110 hertz. And let's tweak with the gain and see what we get. Don't want to turn that up. We'll try turning it down. We'll put that down all the way at minus 15 decibels. And then we'll tweak with the quantize. About 2.82 is good. Now we're going to go to our fourth band. We'll change that to the default EQ curve. We'll set that at 501 hertz. And again, we're going to take the gain, put it all the way down. And let's play with the quantize again. Somewhere around 5.45. That works really well. Now we'll take band 5, turn that on. We'll set this at 915 hertz. Again, take all the frequencies out with a minus 15 decibel gain. Kind of hollow there, so we'll increase the quantize a considerable amount. We'll go with 11. Now we'll take band 6, turn that on. We'll set this at a very high frequency, maybe about 13. We'll just go with that. And let's start to increase the gain because there could be a little bit more high frequencies in the sound. About 3.60. And we'll set the quantize. We'll actually leave the quantize at the default. I think it sounds good there. And now we're going to get our last band, band 8. We'll set that to be the default. We'll set the frequency at 341. And once again, we'll decrease the gain all the way to minus 15. And let's tweak with the quantize one last time. .92 will work. And we're almost done with our sound. We've got one more effect to add. It's another third-party plugin, and it's another free one that can be used on both Windows and Mac. We're going to use Clip Shifter. All we're going to do in Clip Shifter is we're going to take the in gain and we're going to change it to about 4.94 decibels to add some more grit and loudness to the sound. And there we have our bass. So that was my tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like this video and leave a comment as it really helps us out. And please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.